Hello everyone, bringing you a video today featuring some recollections from the Gulf War. David Sayer got in touch with me a little while ago and through conversation very kindly agreed to chat to me on Skype, pass on some of his memories of his time serving out in the Gulf in 1990-91, of course deployment to Saudi Arabia, and then his experiences of the ground campaign. Without further ado, we'll get into the main part of the video and let David pick up the story. Thank you for coming on, David. Obviously, we were saying earlier, but with the 30th anniversary with it being the 30th anniversary of Desert Shield and then Desert Storm, or Operation Granby more properly, we've agreed to come on and talk a little bit about your experiences in the Gulf. You were in the artillery at the time. Could you sort of take us through almost a chronology of what happened to start off with, of where you were when you first found you were being deployed, for example?
Yeah, so it was quite an interesting deployment in the fact that I didn't go with my parent unit. My parent unit was 49 Field Regiment, Royal Artillery. At the time, we were actually on adventure training, and I was stationed in British Army of the Rhine. So we were down in Bavaria and having a very nice time enjoying adventure training.
Yes.
We got called back slightly early, and there was about 50 of us, as I remember. Got called in to report, and we all got basically told that we'd be joining 40 Field Regiment. They were based in Hona, obviously in BAOR at the time, and part of 7 Armoured. So literally we had about 2 days to pack our kit for what we were told to take and get ready. All excess kit was packed into what was then called MFO boxes. They're like a plywood box. So all your spare kit, and you had to empty your room, the accommodation you were living in. I was a single bloke at the time, and we had to get ready to go and meet 40 fields. And that we did literally within about 48 hours. We all got on the old British Army white buses.
Yes.
Travelled up to Hona, and there we were allocated certain gun batteries. You know, you have 3 gun batteries per regiment and 1 HQ battery. Yes. I got seconded to 137 battery, as do quite a few other guys from my particular regiment and my battery. My actual battery I served with was 143 battery, but there I ended up with 137 battery, Java battery.
Was this to make up numbers? Was this because 40 regiment was right? Okay.
So to make up war numbers. Generally, in peacetime you have 6 guns per gun battery. For going to war, they wanted to have 8, and that's what we did. We had they brought out the old rolls, the reserve stock of guns, and we made up the complement for that. And we joined, like I say, 137 battery, done some training with them. At the weekends, funny enough, we could still go back to our parent unit at the weekend.
Oh right, okay.
They gave us the Saturday and Sunday off for about 2 or 3 weekends. To give us some time off, and obviously for the married guys to see their wives at the time. But in between Monday to Friday, we were doing lots of physical training,
yes,
lots of NBC training, as you can imagine, weapons handling, and getting the kit ready for deploying to the desert, which, as you can imagine, we were in BAOR at the time. Everything was green, and the climate's somewhat different to the Gulf.
Indeed. So, I mean, I know you're on self-propelled guns at the time.
That's right.
Did the vehicles, was there any concern regarding the vehicles being used in a desert environment? Because I know the Challenger, there were obviously major issues with the concerns. Was there an engineering concerns as well?
So the M109A2, which is a self-propelled 155mm gun, was fine for the deployment, and we never had generally any issues with the gun itself. What we did have is you have to feed the gun, and that was part of my role. I was a gun driver, what they call the limber driver, and you have to supply the gun with ammunition. Now the problem we had was we had quite aging limber vehicles, which were the stalwarts. Six vehicle.
Yeah.
And they decided that they wouldn't be fit for the deployment. So what they decided to do was issue a series of 8-ton Bedford vehicles, 4x4s. And 14-ton Bedfords as well. So we drawed those out of war stock that they had in deployment at BAOR. And as you can imagine, everything had to be turned from green to sand.
Sand, yes.
Yeah. So there was frenetic activity in getting all the vehicles serviced, readied. I think all the guns had their tracks changed. All the vehicles had to have their tyres changed. You know, it was mass activity.
Yes.
And then, of course, all ready for spraying, and we sprayed them all up this lovely sand colour.
Yeah.
Uniform-wise, again, quite interesting. We didn't have any sand uniforms. So,
of course, no, indeed.
Yeah. So they dug out jungle tropical uniform for us and gave us 2 sets of that and a jungle flat boonie hat.
Yes.
But they issued, I think, a mosquito net. The boots were the same, but some guys didn't even get the jungle fatigues. Some guys literally. I remember seeing one poor guy out there. He had and you've done a subject on this, was the old 68 pattern.
Yes.
He was wearing his 68 pattern trousers out there. I think
presumably in shirt sleeves.
Yes, yeah. But he'd taken the lining out of them just to try.
Yeah, good Lord.
So that was how unprepared, uniform wise.
Yeah.
We were as an organisation at that time. That got better later on, obviously. But for an instant deployment, we didn't really have anything to put on much.
No, well, it's interesting to see the lack of preparation there've been in terms of updating desert kit, because prior to that, the only sort of the last proper standard issue desert uniform was the old 50 pattern, the cellular jacket and trousers. There'd been some experiments, but they'd not updated beyond that really, which is crazy.
My father had served in a very similar climate. He'd served in the Suez Canal in 1950, 51, I think, 51 to 52. And I remember phoning my father back home for some advice on kit, because you can't be experienced from an old soldier. So I spoke to him, and I always remember seeing the picture of David Sterling in World War II wearing the large jacket, standing by the jeeps. And I always sort of was concerned, why is that guy wearing that huge woolly duffel coat in the desert, And I thought, it must get cold. And my father confirmed that. He said, whatever you do, pack your woolly pulley.
Absolutely, yeah.
The best bit of advice I ever had off my father before I deployed on an operation, I think. Said, because that was part of the kit list. But he did say, make sure you've got your warm kit, because it will get cold at night. Your body, the extremes of temperatures, you will feel it. And that was a great bit of advice. So, yeah, absolutely fantastic. Boots-wise, we had the combat hide. I think by then some had the second pattern, some had the first pattern. I don't think I saw any DMS out there, but there may have been some DMS at that time.
Yeah.
But no desert boot.
No, indeed, yeah.
What I did, and I don't know if you noticed on some of my photos, I wrote to my parents, and I'd already purchased a pair of jungle boots some period of time.
Yes.
They were back in the UK. So they posted them out to me, and that was probably the best bit of footwear I'd ever worn when I was out there, was a pair of jungle boots.
The US jungle boots.
That's correct, yeah. And they were a 60 pattern. I think they were like 68 dated pattern. All I did was block they had like some vents on the inside.
Yeah, drainage eyelets, yes.
And I put some masking tape to cover those up so the sand didn't come through.
Yeah.
But for keeping your feet cool, brilliant, absolutely brilliant piece of kit. Yeah. And what you also got to remember, Simon, is the equipment we had was 58.
Yes.
Being artillery at fair while, we still had 58 pattern weapon and SLRs, GPMGs, LMGs. So, we hadn't been issued the SA-80, although some of the infantry units, like one staffs who we supported out there, had been issued the SA-80.
Yes.
So, pretty much there was quite a universal setting of ammunition, and they obviously had the early issue PLC as well, but we still had the 58.
Yes, I'd say, as seen from your photos. I'll probably link your Instagram page in a pinned comment, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So people can see the photographs, yeah.
Well, the one piece of PLC kit we did get issued was a Bergen.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, I've seen, since the photographs showing that, a mix of the Bergen, as you say, with the 58,
Yes, we got the very early olive PLC Bergen without the side pouches, actually. Oh,
right, okay.
Yeah, no, I don't know why we never got those, but we never got issued those. But strangely, I had a private purchase Bergen at the time, which I purchased back in 1985. It was the old Berghaus Rock.
Yes.
And I had some side pouches on that, so I decided to leave the PLC at home, and I brought my own Bergen out there.
Your
So
private purchase one, yeah.
it was acceptable at the time. It was green, and you could wear it. And of course, helmet wise, we'd actually got the Mark 6 by then.
Yes.
We had the the plastic helmet moved away from the steel turtle helmet by then, or AFV helmet. Some of the guys had that as well, but we'd all gone to the Mark 6 by then.
Okay.
We did get issued an awful lot of NBC suits. I think we got issued,
Yeah.
I think about three. Don't quote me on this, but about 3 sets of NBC.
Yes.
Lots of canisters, all the sort of bits and pieces that came with the NBC suits as well.
Were you up to the S10 by that point? Do you have the S10 respirators?
I think. Now that's a very good question. I think we were still S6, if I remember.
Right. Okay.
I'm not 100% sure, Simon. It's 30 years ago.
Oh, indeed. So yes,
I couldn't remember if we got those when we got back, or no, I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't 100% say if we got the new version by then. What else did we get? Oh, we got an extra water bottle. They were very generous. They gave us another 58 pattern water bottle. And about that was really about it. And of course, we got issued the old canvas cot bed, the British wire type, which wasn't very popular with a lot of guys because they were always after the American cot beds.
The X beds, yes, yeah. So you got the old low type. The W-shaped leg. Interesting.
They're very similar to the the World War II type, but they're just green. Pretty much the same pattern, to be honest. Beyond that, I think that was very early issue kit that we got. Done about 4 weeks basic training and refresh training. About after we'd got all the vehicles ready, we drove them up to, I think it was Bremerhaven, where they were loaded onto ships. And they went out, and of course they'd take a slightly longer period of time to get out there than we could.
Of course,
just training, doing infantry training, NBC training, medical training, that sort of thing for the continuing period. And then we had an advanced party which went out the tail end of September, and the majority of the main party went out early October.
Yes.
We flew out on a chartered civilian flight, TWA, I think it was, if I remember rightly.
Right. Okay.
And I brought myself a nice pair of sunglasses en route, because the army ones were a bit crap.
Yes.
I've seen those. They're like the turtle spectacle.
Yes.
Yeah. So they weren't the best. So I decided to get myself a nice pair. Actually, funny enough, it was literally on the flight. I purchased those.
Yes.
So I brought those. We got out and we obviously went to Algebile. I expect you've seen plenty of film footage of guys there. And what was interesting, Simon, was we got off at the airport and travelled down to the dock area, seeing the American Marines who were out there at the time.
Of course, yes.
The American Army, as far as I'm aware, that was just the Marines at that stage. With absolutely loads of kit being lined up, attack helicopters, all that sort of stuff. And we sat down at the port in one huge hangar, all one regiment in one hangar, sort of divided into our batteries, etc. And basically waited a few days for the vehicles to start arriving off the ships. So then we rotated into a camp setting from there on a sort of weekly basis.
Yes.
Camp 4 was the camp that we had, and they were basically like a porter building, modular building camp, where we went up and we done more NBC training, acclimatized, more physical activity. Nothing too strenuous because we were trying to get used to the sort of 40-degree heat at that time.
Of course, I was going to say straight from Germany to Saudi Arabia.
Bit of a shocker, yeah.
Yes.
Took a little while to get used to that, of course. Didn't get any uniform for a couple of weeks, and then we got our first issue of uniform, if I remember rightly. One complete set, trousers, shirt, and a boonie cap, and I think a couple of like sand-coloured sweat rags. I think that was about it. Yeah. Upon deployment, we had to start taking malaria tablets. Although I never ever saw or felt any mosquito issues out there at all. And literally after about a month of being out there, I stopped taking the malaria tablets because it just seemed pointless.
There's no threat at all. You never saw a mosquito, so yeah.
Really, so we've done a lot of physical activity, kept training. waited for the vehicles to turn up. The vehicles turned up in drips and drabs. We then got together as a unit, and then as a division, as a brigade rather, and then deployed out into the desert. I would say it probably would have been again late October, mid to late October, the time we were getting operationally ready with all the kit there to deploy out into the desert to start practicing, getting used to it. That was interesting because the Saudi desert was very, very fine sand.
Yes.
And a lot of the vehicles that I mentioned earlier, the 8-ton and the 14-ton Bedfords, weren't really that good in that sort of terrain. The guns were fine. The tracked vehicles were fine.
Yeah.
There lied a concern that our job was to feed the guns with ammunition, but a lot of the time we'd end up digging them out because we'd be bogged in because the vehicles, the Bedfords, couldn't get to them.
Yeah, copious use of sand channels and things like that to try and dig them out again.
That's a very good point. We had the sand channels fit, and also a lot of the vehicles we had the JCBs to help with unloading the ammunition.
Right. Yes.
I have got some pictures, and I could send you. There's an A-frame structure that fits on the back of the trucks, and we used to tow the JCBs behind the vehicles. So I think we had about 3 or 4 JCBs per gun battery for this use. What we did later to counter that is we had an inspection from some senior officers who came around and sort of did the morale bit. And one of the main things, I remember talking to this particular officer because he was interested I was wearing jungle boots.
Right.
Because he was wearing jungle boots himself. But he was wearing the very early sort of 44 pattern with a big rubber sole, British ones. So I think he was a brigadier at the time. And he was talking to me, and I expressed my concern over this issue about the vehicles bogging in. And so did a lot of other guys. And he said, we're going to look at an ammunition vehicle that can feed the guns in tracks. And what we ended up with was an American version, I think, called the 548. It's basically just like very similar to a British 432 with a canvas back body, just with a load carrying area.
Right. Okay.
I never did get to drive those, even though I had a track license. And they were later on deployed and used for direct feed to the guns, but with us in reserve. So we had multiple ways of getting sure that the guns were going to get the ammunition they required. So we spent probably about another good month exercising and practicing in Saudi Arabia in the desert. And then we deployed into defensive positions and we dug in.
Yeah.
We dug in for quite a considerable period of time, probably right until the new year, January 91. And in that time, we basically were in a central position north of Al Jubail in the defensive line of Saudi Arabia, and just carried on more training. I did the signals course in that time in the desert.
Right. Okay.
And so did other guys, did various other courses just to keep us going. And just kept preoccupied, getting acclimatized, and the temperature, as you can imagine, the winter was then starting to come.
Yes, people forget this. Is it that it was over the winter of 1991? People seem to forget that. That the desert's not the most hospitable place at that. Heat aside, it becomes quite unhospitable. Yeah,
absolutely. And then you had the extremes of hot days and very cold nights. And obviously we would be doing guard rosters throughout the night and patrols around the area. And I remember, this is how the mind plays tricks on you. I remember laying at wake one night, just literally before I was due sentry duty, and I woke up and it was a full moon. And I don't know what it is about the desert, but you seem to get a really big moon, and it was shining bright all over the sand. And it felt so cold that I thought it snowed. My mind was playing tricks.
Yes.
It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I thought it had bloody snowed. And I actually remember reaching out and touching the sand to see if it was snow or not.
Yeah.
That's how tired you sometimes get,
Yes. But, and the tick of the light is enough.
And then I go back to what I was talking about earlier about David Sterling and his duffel coat.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm glad I had my woolly jumper. So
did you have woolly jumper and smock over that?
Basically.
Smock.
I even bought out there a private purchase green fibre pile jacket as well.
Right.
What else? A Norwegian. I took a Norwegian top out there. Again, that was a private purchase then.
Yeah.
We weren't issued those, but I took that out there. And that was about it, really. The only other thing I did take I had a DPM smock, and I took that, the very windproof early version smock.
Yes.
But they were like gold dust, and that was a great piece of kit. Had that as well, and of course we had shamars to wrap up around your neck.
Of course, yes. Yeah.
That was about it really. And then of course things started to escalate over the winter of 1991. We had the attack at Al Kafji, I think it was. Yep.
Yes, it was, yeah, Kafji, yeah.
And then Scud missiles started to get launched.
Yes.
All sort of, and then we started. Then the air campaign started on the 16th, 17th of January, and then things really started to hot up. And then we had, we were told early on in the new year that we were going to get another brigade out there.
Yes.
To supplement us. Now, I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember Lieutenant Colonel Denaro of the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars paying the regiment a visit. And he was from obviously a tank regiment with Challenge 1.
Yes.
He specifically came to the regiment to talk to all the guys of the regiment. So here you had a commanding officer from the tanks talking to a regiment of artillery guys. And Denaro at that time had served out in Oman, and his story he gave was that he'd been caught with his pants down without artillery support out there, and he was never going to allow that to happen on any whatever deployment or issues we had moving forward.
Yes.
And he said, I will not be moving forward unless I've got you guys, covering me with artillery support. I will not get caught out again. And he was a very eloquent gentleman. I think he actually went on to become a general. I think he did quite well within the British Army, but a very eloquently talking guy. Gave a great speech to us all. And that was mainly the unit we were supporting was the Queen Royal Irish Hussars and the Staffords. So and because they had warriors, and the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars were the Challenger ones.
Yes.
All got ready then to basically to move forward, to move north. We weren't disclosed the exact location.
No, of course not.
We basically all the B vehicles, all the wheeled vehicles were then ready, lined up to move north. All the track vehicles, all the command posts, the 432s, the Warriors, and the guns, of course, were all loaded onto tank transporters.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and they all went north. So and we all headed north for our deployments. Obviously, ours was on the Iraq Saudi border. And then we sort of found out what we're going. It was interesting at that time when I was heading north. I had a brush with death where I had a road traffic accident. I was sitting in the passenger seat of my Bedford, and my young co-driver, a young gunner, was driving at the time, and an American tank transporter pulled in front of me and literally ripped the whole front axle off my Bedford TM vehicle.
Good Lord. Right.
Yeah, so we shot into the air, and this is all with about 8 unit carrying carriers on the back, full of high explosives, of course.
Yes,
like you do.
A hairy situation, to say the least.
Yeah. So I ended up sitting beside the road with my co-driver for about 5 days, waiting to get recovered, thinking I'm going to miss the war because I've been involved in a road traffic accident. So, and we were left to our own devices. I mean, luckily we had enough rations and food, and the regimental police were patrolling up and down, and they organised recovery for us. But literally, we sat at that position for a while, then got recovered, moved to a centre workshop area, and I still wasn't with my regiment then. I hadn't joined my regiment at that time. Yeah. And then a vehicle turned up. And it came from 147 battery. They took the young co-driver from me. They said, "Oh, we'll come back for you." They stripped all the ammunition off it and disappeared again. And that was it. That's all I saw of them for a long period of time. So I sat then on my own in this workshop depot with other broken down vehicles and other ones that had been involved in accidents and problems. And what was interesting there, they parked all the ferrets up. The little 4x4 ferrets. And they decided they weren't going to use them, so they centred them in this workshop area, and they basically brought over more warriors, and they were going to use warriors instead of the ferrets. So all the crews were on the ferrets. So there was guys there that I knew that were ferret drivers and ferret commanders, and I was having conversations with these guys, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna get these new warriors." And what was amusing, when they got the new Warriors, they turned up green, of course, So
Typical. Yes, that
yeah,
makes perfect sense. Yes.
yeah. So there was me taking the mickey out of these guys with these little paintbrushes, painting all their Warriors, little knowing that my replacement vehicle turned up green as well.
Green.
So
Yes.
there was me a few days later painting my own new vehicle.
Oh dear.
Yeah, and then
Well,
eventually I got somebody else turned up, and then I rejoined my battery again, and re-kitted and swapped all my kit from the broken down vehicle onto the new one, and headed off back to join my battery then, and we were then in deployment positions on the Saudi-Iraqi border, waiting for the fateful day.
yes.
Yeah. At that time, we then started commencing what we call gun raids, where the guns would go forward pre-bombed up, and they would fire on predetermined positions, and then bug out. And it was a cat and mouse game there to try and get the Iraqis to fire back us so we could find their locations.
Yes. Yeah.
So radar direction finding, they could locate them and then take on their radars and their own artillery as well. So they did a couple of raids there, and sadly, that was during one of these operations, we lost one of our one of my colleagues was unfortunately killed in an accident. Then he was run over by one of the guns, and I don't really want to go into the detail of that. It was a very young lad, and it was a very very sad situation that we were faced with. But that was the first casualty and the only casualty that we ever had on deployment. Thank goodness. That was a sad loss of life at that time. So we basically then get very close to February. The air campaign was relentless at that time.
Yes.
I mean, you could see in the sky, the amount of vapor trails of aircraft up high, and at night time, the Apache and attack helicopters flying low over the positions. And I remember one particular night, they lifted my whole cam net off my vehicle and blew it away because Apache came flying over very, very low, and the downdraft had picked it up, and it cascaded across the desert, and I had to go chasing after it. So yeah, fun times there.
Cursing the flyboys.
Yeah. I had a few curse words, like you could imagine, at sort of 2 o'clock in the morning.
Absolutely.
So literally formed up, and then we got ready. We got our orders to get ready to go, and we got ready for the 24th of Feb to cross the border across the berm. And I guess you've seen pictures of the berm.
Yes.
Of what the Iraqi army had constructed, and it was basically about a mile wide minefield with this huge sand berm that they'd installed in the desert to mark the boundary of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And this minefield was quite a formidable obstacle. The American army were given the job of clearing it for us, and the Big Red One put a big sign up, and I remember this on the very early hours of the morning of the 24th, driving past this huge sign, which said, not verbatim, but the words were, "Welcome to Iraq by courtesy of the Big Red One."
Yes.
It was like that,
It's a long-standing tradition that you see that going back Korea and beyond, Second World War, of units, obviously esprit de corps, take credit where credit's due, but yes, it's so
they bulldozed through the berm, used various different mine clearing techniques to clear across. I remember one guy to my front, I don't know what he particularly hit, but he had a big chunk of his tire blown off, but it still stayed inflated. It was quite massive. It's this big chunk of rubber came off his front right-hand wheel, blew off, but he managed to keep going till we got the other side, and then we changed the wheel the other side. But that was probably the only incident we had. But we felt that was probably one of the RAF at the time were dropping these cluster bombs with these droplet bombs.
Yes.
And it was a very small bomb that I think had probably one of our own goals. It's probably one of the RAF had unscurely dropped, and that blew a bit of this rubber off his tyre. So we got to the other side. The weather was pretty appalling, if I remember, quite windy, a lot of sand being picked up.
Yeah.
Not particularly warm. It's quite cold, or it felt cold. It probably wasn't cold. It was probably a summer's day in the UK. But very, very.
Sort of got used to the heat over the preceding months, and then you're into winter. Yeah.
And my understanding was, and I only found this out when I returned, was the winter of 91 was probably one of the worst on record in the area. Was
Oh,
my
right.
understanding.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah. Hang on a minute. There you go. Yeah, so it was quite bad. So we carried on, and we headed north. Literally, we're giving orders of, if I remember rightly, all the objectives were names of metals. They were like zinc,
Yes.
copper, and
I've seen the plan, and that, yeah, that gels with what I've seen of what was going on at the time. Yeah.
and literally when we were required to give fire support of either the staffs or the tankies, we would stop, we would deploy, and there would be a fire mission, and we would fire rounds in support, and however many was required, and then move on.
Yeah.
And my recollections are it was just continually moving, firing, moving, and it was literally that, and it was continuously, pretty much, with some 2 or 3 hours of sitting and waiting for a call to fire, and then not getting one, and then moving forward, and
Yes.
sometimes firing, sometimes not, and it was a mixture of that. And you got to remember there was a sandstorm. I can't remember if that was day 1 or day 2 kicked up, and we kept getting these tank alerts, because what you got to remember is you've got the guns move forward in this V sort of arrowhead formation, and we would follow directly behind them. But our job was to guard the flanks and the rear to the guns. So I think we had 150 on the right flank, so 150 caliber ground machine gun, GPMGs, and Carl Gustavs, so the 84 millimeter Charlie G.
Yes.
And on the right flank they had about the same, but that was it for anti-tank defense.
Yeah.
To guard the rear. So, but our main defense was always the Challengers to protect our flanks, and they did a great job. Nothing really got through except for infantry. So we kept pushing forward, and like I say, for the 4 days, or pretty much the 3 days and 3 nights, all I can remember is pushing forward, fire mission, pushing forward. And I was trying to recollect the other day how much sleep I'd got over the period, and I think it couldn't have been more than about 4 or 5 hours.
I was going to say, I can't imagine it was much.
No, over 100 hours. I literally had a handful of hours capturing sleep, falling asleep at the wheel while waiting to move forward, that sort of thing. It was never found your sleeping bag at that period of time, of course.
No.
Just kept going all the time, grabbing brews and food when you could. And it was relentless, absolutely relentless, moving forward. It reminded me in the history books of Blitzkrieg, of the Germans advance through the early stages of World War II, and that must have been how those guys felt, because the rapid advance was, it was breathtaking. And we kept receiving Iraqi prisoners, and you could see, these guys were absolutely demoralised by this time.
Yes.
The air campaign had its job. Done its job, the strategy had worked, and by then, whatever units were ready to fight were pretty much the Republican Guard.
Yeah.
But even those guys weren't a match for, you can imagine Challenger 1 or Abrams. And I think the Republican Guard, the biggest or most modern tank they had would have been like T-72s.
Yeah.
But they were no match for Challenger, which outranged them, had better night sight. And even the Warriors were taking out tanks with their Raden cannons.
Yes, yeah, 30 millimeter.
Yeah, so because they had fantastic night sights. So yeah, we pushed on the advance, and I remember a particular story of the Staffords were shooting so far ahead in their Warrior that the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars couldn't keep up with them. They were told to slow down a bit. They were scooting ahead in their Warriors, which is a great AFE, for that sort of terrain. And they had to sort of be told to sort of rein it in a little bit, wait for your support. You're going too far ahead, Carried on. We had numerous prisoners we took. We had a guy whose, I think it was his mother was Moroccan, so he could speak different dialect of Arabic, and he would help translate to the prisoners. But pretty much when we saw them, they'd decanted all their kit, and they were pretty much walking in they're just their uniform.
Yeah.
And there'd be sort of whole groups of them huddled up that other units had already sort of processed, and they were just waiting to go down the line, really.
Yeah. And they're quite happy to have, not happy, but they were content to have surrendered.
Yeah, absolutely. And quite happy to be alive, I should imagine.
Yes.
And when you went through a lot of the Iraqi positions, you could see why they were happy to be alive. They'd absolutely been thrashed by the air campaign, and we were actually quite glad of that, obviously, because it was the Iraqi army at the time was the sixth biggest in the world.
Yes.
And it was quite a trepidation for us to think here we were as a UN coalition fighting the sixth biggest army in the world.
I mean, it was certainly the military powerhouse in the Middle East. I mean, it goes without saying. And
yeah. So at the time you're a young man, your sympathy doesn't really wane. They're the enemy,
no,
and you want to get through that alive, and they do. But in humanity side of it, you saw these poor souls. Some of them probably hadn't eaten or drinking and had any water for ages. And a lot of the guys literally would, give them bottles, mineral waters of bottles that they got off the from the Saudis that we were dishing out to these guys just to keep them going. So we carried on, pushed to advance, and I think it was very early on day 4, because this is all just a flash bang of 100 hours is what you remember.
Yes.
When it drew to an end. I remember a Gazelle and a Lynx literally dropping down in front of our as we were driving forward, dropping down and issuing some new orders. They stopped the whole column. We all stopped. The OC, etc., went forward, or the battery commander went forward. New orders were given, and that was when we were told to go and take the Kuwait to Basra main road, north of Kuwait City. And I remember looking at my fuel gauge at the time, and I think I had about a third of a tank of fuel left, and I had 1 jerry can left of diesel. I thought, Christ, how far is it? Are we going to make it? Because we hadn't had replan at that time. We just kept going, fuel tank. And I thought, Christ, what are the guns going to be like? Have they got enough fuel? So anyway, we hell for leather kept pushing on that morning until we got to the vicinity of the Basra High Road. And I can't remember if we had a fire mission in between that or we just kept going. I think we just kept going. And we got to that position literally just north of the Mutla Ridge, I think it is. And we deployed there, and so did the tankies and the staffs at that time. And then in the distance, you could see the devastation which had already taken part, which was, a line of vehicles of all sorts strewn for miles and miles that had been taken out by the US Air Force and the RF and the coalition. And that was burning and burnt out vehicles for as far as the eye could see. We did stop and search some bunkers that were built in around that area at that time. I've got some pictures of those. I could probably send them some to you.
I'd be interested to see, certainly. Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
And literally we got there and we got to a deployed position we were told to hold at that point. And then we got another order to say only fire if fired upon,
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And then we told there'd been an early ceasefire. At that point, a lot of the lads, I remember looking over the distance, there must have been one lad out for a what we used to call shovel recce, which is where you go off with a spade to do your business.
Yes.
And somebody rushed over and told him that we were at a ceasefire. And I remember seeing the spade flying up in the air and a yoo-hoo, he'd obviously been quite happy that he was getting through it. So anyway, we held at this position. And I remember at that point, we'd been running on adrenaline at that point.
Of course, yeah.
No sleep or nothing. I could not sleep. And they all said, all right, we're going to do guard duties, but if you can, get some sleep. I remember guys getting their cot beds out and everything. And I remember laying on, and I'd got rid of my cot bed at that stage, and I got hold of a stretcher. I got hold of an army stretcher.
Okay. Yeah.
And I deployed that out on the ground. And my idea being that if I was going to be wounded, I'd go out on my bed, So
yeah.
That I'd managed to acquire. So I remember laying on that thing, and I was in my sleeping bag, and I just couldn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. I was too, I don't know, so I was overtired or still running on adrenaline, whatever.
I'm still wired probably from just as you say, you've had so many chemicals. Your brain's been keeping you going. It's very difficult to come down off that, isn't it?
And I remember literally laying there, and I kept getting up and making cups of tea. I'll have something to drink. That'll make me sleep. Couldn't sleep, and it took me another probably half a day before I could even rest my eyes. And when I did sleep, I slept like a log and woke up with terrible headaches because I'd obviously gone through that that
Yeah.
phase of, trying to get your body accustomed to kipping again. So that was rather bizarre. And then we were told there's going to be a fly past of helicopters coming over our position, and it would be the American General Schwarzkopf, going off to take the surrender.
Right.
And we had this big massive formation, 2V formations of these Apaches and gunships, and fly over our particular position. And again, I've got a photo of that. I could send that to you.
Yeah, definitely.
That was an amazing sight.
Fascinating to see. Yeah.
Yeah, and they flew right over our position and went to take the ceasefire of the Iraqi army at that time. So, in the distance, you could see some of the oil fires that the Iraqis had obviously caused on their retreat through.
Yeah.
And there's obviously lots of very famous pictures of the devastation of that.
Yeah.
What we were getting on ourselves was little specks of oil droplets at the time.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. And they were landing on the vehicle, and you could literally get them on your uniforms, depending on which direction the wind was blowing in. Sometimes you get the sun, sometimes that would be blocked out by these oil fires.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the best sort of habitat to be living.
No, I was going to say not a healthy environment to be in.
No. And we stayed there for, crikey, it must have been a good week or so. And then we got orders that some of the guys could start getting shipped back, and they were flying Hercules out into they're making temporary airfields. And some of the guys that they didn't have to drive back, they were putting on these Hercules and flying them back. Then a lot of the ammunition, you can imagine, we all had war stock.
Of course.
Stock in the guns. So we had to do like shuttle runs between that location back down to Saudi to these huge ammunition depots to get rid of the ammunition.
Right.
Now, as I'd already spoken about, the Mutla Ridge and the devastation that had happened there, by that stage we were driving past all the devastation that happened at that point. And there was everything in that cavalcade of vehicles.
There's some quite harrowing footage of that. I would not like to have experienced it firsthand, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, we did very early on. I must admit, I sneaked across to have a look at the devastation over there. And there's been a lot of stories of thousands of bodies and lots of death there. Now, I didn't see that.
Right.
But I was there some hours after. So whether or not wounded and that bit, I would say there was a few hundred. But I didn't witness thousands.
Yeah.
There was a lot of death. Don't get me wrong. And it was all very morbid to see, and there was some terrible sights to see. But I didn't see the huge numbers that I've seen in the press.
Right.
And I know there was concerns later on it had been a war crime or something to that degree, but as far as I was concerned, they were a retreating army, and they had been looting Kuwait. And what was interesting, saw things from, civilian cars to scooters to, and they'd packed full of stuff they'd taken out of Kuwait City. They'd looted carpets, Xerox machines, you name it. It was all in the back of these vehicles, and it was bizarre. So they were just nicking everything they could.
Yeah.
And heading for the hills, and it got caught out. So carrying on, we got the ammunition back, and I then came back to that position again. Then we got the final run to move the ammunition back, and we literally left Kuwait, headed back on the peripherals of Kuwait City, headed back to Saudi, dropped the ammunition off, and then drove the vehicles into these lines back down at the docks again.
Yeah.
Took all my kit off that I could out of the vehicle. And then we were billeted back at this Camp 4 again, and we were then awaiting what was really good, and this is the good old British Legion for you. I literally got handed a telephone card from the Royal British Legion to phone home, and I hadn't spoken to my parents and I was 24 at the time, but still a single lad. I hadn't spoken to any of my relatives and any of my family for 6 months. I'd just been writing blueies and letters and everything like that. And blueies, I mean the BFPO envelopes that you send out. And that's been my communication. So there's no sat phones back then, no mobile phones or anything like that. And I literally managed to phone up my sister-in-law, who lived next door to my parents, but the time and the distance and everything and the cost and I literally could only speak to her for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But just phoned there to say, look, I am still alive,
Get the word out. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Please tell my parents I'm fine, my brother and everybody else. And I'll be back whenever. I'll give you a call when I'm back in Germany, Then we waited in Camp 4, I think, for about another week and literally got a flight back. And that was late March, early April when we got back to British Army of the Rhine.
And painted everything green again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that took a long time to get all the kit back. Yeah, that took a long time to get the kit back. And I returned to a unit which had been sent all the bits and pieces for spares for Operation Granby. So then we had to, quite rightly, as you say, we had to refit everything and then paint it A2 green again.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a fast ball run through of Operation Granby from my perspective. But is that okay?
It's brilliant. Yes, I have a few questions if you don't mind as well.
Please do. Yes, absolutely.
When you were I've always thought that the run-up is almost similar to the Falklands. If you've got the task force sailing south and everything, and at the same time there's political machinations going on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
What were your sort of thoughts around that when you were deployed? Like, did you think there was going to be did you actually think you were going to war, or did you think this presence was going to be enough? Were you thinking about it at that sort of?
Very much. At the time, the only communication we had, once we deployed in the desert, the only information feed we had was what we were being told, or listening to the BBC World Service.
Yes.
So I brought myself a little shortwave radio when I was out there, and it was, listening to the World Service in the middle of the desert, waiting for updates. And, there was mixed feeling. There was, so you can imagine if you're a professional soldier,
yes,
at some stage, I'd had 2 Northern Ireland tours by then. But at some stage, here we had an opportunity to actually show our professionalism in a war.
Yes.
And it's the adage I always use, Simon, is if you have a professional footballer and you train him to the extent degree, and he always sits on the sidelines and never plays a game, he becomes very frustrated. So you can imagine you've got a lot of young lads here.
Yeah, very much keyed up and ready to go in a way.
With the trepidation of actually this is the real things. You get this feeling, So yes, I was apprehensive. Some lads were scared, we had quite a wide spectrum of young guys who were in their 18, 19, and I was, like I say, I was 23, 24 at the time. I had apprehension, and I think the biggest thing that was on everybody's mind was chemical weapons.
Of course,
yes. We kept thinking that Saddam's got these missiles. He's used them against the Kurds in the past. He's gonna start dropping them on us. But we were well trained and well drilled in NBC.
Yes.
You can imagine the Warsaw Pact threat, which is why we were in BAR.
Yes,
we
of course.
spent an awful lot of time doing NBC training. Our kit was the best. I would say better than the Americans. There's always a first.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. The US Marine Corps, of course, were issued a large number of the charcoal NBC suits. So I think they were quite glad to get them.
They were, absolutely. They were also very glad to see our main battle tanks turn up very early on, because when we first turned up, I think there must have been about 200 Challengers I think we took with us from the Queen's RSRs. And the Yanks, I think the American Marines only had medium tanks.
I think they still were using the M60 at that point. Yeah.
Yes. So they were quite pleased to see these huge, great Challenger ones rock up. Oh, you've got a main battle tank. The Brits.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And although some of them actually thought we were Australians because we had the desert rat on the side of the.
Oh, right. Yeah.
They thought it was a kangaroo.
They moved to Brook. Yeah.
And probably never heard a British accent in their life.
No.
So I mean, going back to your original question, we were. So I personally, I wanted something to happen, but I was unsure what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And I joined the army at the age of 18 because I wanted to be a career soldier. I didn't join. We had a lot of lads who joined the army in the 80s, and I joined in 85. Were because unemployment was very bad at the time.
Of course, yes.
And that was a regular, steady job, and they could provide for their family. I joined at 18 because I wanted to join the army. That was an ambition for me that I'd always want to do. So, I had in my mind when I joined, I wanted to be a career soldier. So live operations for me was something I wanted to do.
Yes.
So
And I
going
noticed in one of your posts that your dad was an artilleryman as well. So was that directed you into
absolutely.
artillery? Yeah.
I was fourth or fifth generation artillery in my
Oh,
family.
there we are. Yeah.
So and I joined my father's my father's regiment. So
Right.
and I was one of the few people in training in depot in Woolwich. They said, oh, you can pick what regiment you want to go, and I literally said, I want to join 49 Field Regiment as a young 18-year-old. Why do you want to do that? And I then explained because my father had been it. And
that would probably have sat quite well, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I got it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
So it's very mixed feelings, Simon, when you get something like that. You tend to think, what is going to happen? What's the worst that can happen? And I must admit, I wrote my parents a final letter in case I wasn't coming back, and I sent it to a good mate of mine back in the civilian street, and I sent it to him in a sealed envelope and said in a letter to him, if I don't come back, please give this to my parents. I didn't want to send it directly to my dad at the time because that would have worried them. But I did that as a sort of thing, and it was as a letter describing my feelings at the time, etc.
Yes.
And thankfully, I remember going back on leave, and that was one of the first things he gave to me was this.
Gave you a letter back.
And said,
yes.
You go, mate.
Do you still have it?
I never had to do that, So
do you still have it?
No, I wish I had.
I
wish I had kept it, but
no.
Yeah, I mean, it was the thoughts of a 24-year-old at the time.
This is it, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
When you get older, you get wiser, Simon. So.
Yes. Well, it's funny actually. I have a friend who served out in Iraq in from 2006, and he'd been a reenactor as well as being a soldier for a little while, and he went out there with the mentality of a collector and a reenactor. So he's kept everything.
Right.
His one kit in one big lot to say, if it'll get donated to a museum at some point, if nothing else, So
that's very similar to what I am myself. So
yes,
from the age of 9, I used to collect World War II. So I was an adamant collector. And back in the 70s, you could go into an army surplus store back then and pick up World War II stuff for penny.
Don't say, I know. Yes.
So I've been a collector for a lot of years, and my partner now cringes at how much I've got in the house collection wise. So I've got a lifetime. So I have actually collected quite a few bits from the Gulf, but that's not some of the items I've got. I have got my original. They gave us when we joined 137 Battery. They gave us these little made up patches, and it's a symbol of an elephant with Java on it. So that was the history of 137 Battery. So I've got that, and I've got the original Desert Rat badge I was issued with. And other bits of it. I've still got my original boonie hat and my shirt. Unfortunately, the jungle boots I carried on wearing, and they fell apart eventually.
Of course, yes.
But they were a great thing. So if anybody wants a good desert boot, get a pair of 60s jungle American boots because they're great. And I've kept some other bits and pieces as well. What is really nice, Simon, and I don't know if you saw it on my Instagram page. Sadly, my parents passed away late last year, and
I'm sorry to hear that.
When I was clearing their house, I found the Christmas cards I'd handmade in the Gulf and sent to them and my sister.
I have not seen that on your page. I'll have to go back and have another look.
And they'd kept all my blue envelopes that I'd written to them at that period of time. And I said to my brother, I said, oh, look, my parents, that mum and dad kept these. He said, oh, I kept all your letters as well. So even the letters I'd written to my brother, I kept all as well.
Well, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
And some of the amazing things they also kept, they'd recorded everything on VHS tape of the whole time and every newspaper clipping of the time as well. So
fantastic.
They kept all this in a box. So I've got it now. So it's
brilliant. That's excellent.
I've got a few memories wonderful. Of that. So,
I did have another couple of questions on.
Please fire away.
Fantastic, as we've been going through. You've talked about your kit and everything as well, which is brilliant. The sort of nitty gritty of that. You mentioned obviously you were getting bottled water and stuff like that. You said you were eating on the fly. Were you having to rely on ration packs and stuff once you actually moved into Iraq, or?
So there's a good question. So when we were, I talked about we were dug in positions in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
We were getting centrally fed there with fresh food.
Yeah.
There was a concern that if we were going to get ration packs, we would become insular in our positions, and also that hygiene would be an issue.
Yeah.
So basically, everything we used to eat on was a plastic plate, plastic knife, fork, and spoon when we were central fed. and it would all go into a bin liner and be burnt. And that was how we kept vermin away, the flies and everything else. Now, when we went to war, we literally, it was whatever you'd been given there in a tinned ration. It was the old tin 14-man rat packs we were given. But as all soldiers do, you do a bit of trading. So
of course, yes.
Over the period, I'd traded a few of the 14-man ration tins, because the Americans, for some reason, were mad on the sausages. They loved, and they were also mad on our woolly jumpers. And I wasn't going to part with my woolly jumper, but I did part with some sausages.
Yes.
And over that period of time, I was quite amazed to get these foiled bags, boil in a bag. I hadn't seen at that stage. So the old American MREs, which were great for cooking on the fly.
Of course, yeah.
And literally, what I used to do is there's a overflow tank behind the cab of an 8-ton Bedford truck. If you wedged a MRE behind that, it would warm it up for you.
Right.
You could
spot on, and then just poike it out and away you go.
Heat it with a radiator, and that used to work. So if I got hungry, I'd literally hang out the side of my cab as we were driving along, wedge this thing into the radiator, stick it in there for 10 minutes, pull it out and eat it on the go. Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So, and a lot of guys. Also, I asked my parents to send me some parcels, which they very kindly did. They sent me lots of tins, and I asked for things like tins of fruit. I want to keep vitamin C in me, and
of course, yes.
And they sent me lots of food parcels out there, which was great. They kept me supported by many a parcel. I think I got a parcel a week when I was out there, so my parents were fantastic through that period.
Yes.
So I had a good little reserve that I kept for the fateful day,
Absolutely, of course. Yeah. It's interesting how that story mirrors. So my granddad served out in Korea, well, just after the armistice, but he served out in Korea. And it seems whenever the British Army and the American Army butt up together, there's always trades goes on, because they love the bacon the British Army had in Korea, and he could trade that for all sorts of different things. So it's interesting here. The sausages in the compo were the favoured thing in Iraq. That's interesting to
hear. Yeah. I don't know why the sausages were their favourite, but they certainly liked them.
Yes. And there's one other thing I was interested to ask as well, just from talking about sort of looking at your photos and talking about the exercise and everything. I've seen photographs, certainly of the Royal Corps of Transport training with early GPS systems around this time. Did you guys get any training on sort of GPS navigation and stuff?
Good question. So later on, I had a sergeant join me as my co-driver, and he was issued with the very early Magellan GPS.
Right.
And this thing was as big as a shoebox. It was huge.
Yes.
The trouble with it, I think between about 11 and 12 o'clock, there was no satellite coverage. So everything stopped because you had no signal. But this thing was huge, and you could plug it in for battery charging on the little 2-pin plug that you get in military NATO vehicles. You usually get like a little inspection light, but this thing you could plug into that to keep it charged. And we thought this thing was amazing. This huge satellite receiver that done all the navigation for you. Up to that point, we were all walking around with prismatic compasses, and sending vehicles ahead and getting bearings and things like this. And the maps. I mean, the maps, when you look at them, you literally looked at contours. That was it.
Yeah.
Try and look at undulations, waddies, dips in the ground, that sort of thing. And if there was pylons are great navigational aid. So you look at that, and main roads. So and also you use your mileometer on your vehicle. So if you go off on a bearing, you use that, and you can judge distance on that, and you get to a point.
It's interesting because obviously a lot of accounts of fighting in the desert in the Second World War, the tactics and so forth are referred to as naval tactics, but of course the navigation is as well. It's quite similar to navigating a ship in terms of that, using your mileometer and so forth to actually measure your way across the map. Yeah, very interesting. Biggest
issues we had was trying to do, so if we got low on ammunition for the guns, or moving forward, was if we had to go back to the Royal Corps Transport. So the Royal Corps Transport always had difficulty trying to find the guns close. So they would have a rendezvous point that we would go and get resupply from ammunition. The problem you can imagine, if you're 2 o'clock in the morning in a sandstorm in the middle of the desert, you've got to drive 5 Ks to a particular rendezvous point, meet some RCT guys, transfer ammunition onto the back of your truck, and then head back and find the guns in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
So the GPS for that was fantastic.
Of course.
And it was a godsend. So we didn't have many of them, but
No.
we actually, I mean, I was fortunate enough. I had a sergeant who was seconded to me from 4-7 Field Regiment, and he was issued the Magellan. So we used that to
great aid in the desert. Absolutely.
Brilliant.
But it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, David. Thank you very much for running through all this. I'm just trying to think that, I suppose one last question would be, is there any particular moment in everything, be it humorous, be it sort of just something that sticks in your mind of being out there that sort of stuck with you as a fond or another memory of the time you were out there?
I've got lots of very fond memories out there, and the biggest thing I probably remember is the time spent before we went to war, because when we were at war, it seemed a flash to bang scenario.
Yes, of course.
100 hours isn't a lot, really.
No, very short campaign. Yeah.
So that time, and because when you're half asleep, which I think I spent half the time in a daze, it seemed to have gone very, very quick. But the time leading up to it, the morale of the guys. I made some great mates in that period of time.
Yes.
And two of the fondest memories I have was my father sent me 7 Pillars by E. Lawrence, which I read to, and I've still got these books. So he sent them to me. And the other one was, I had a very good mate of mine at the time, and we played an awful lot of chess. My father sent me this very small little chess set.
Yes.
You can imagine, you're in the middle of the desert with nothing, to entertain your time except for doing guard duties, eating, sleeping, cleaning your weapons, and waiting for something to do, really. And thank goodness I took that chess set, because that whiled away hours, and we had a little tally of how many games we were winning between us.
Yes.
But that's some fond memories of literally, and I remember the biggest and beautifulest thing I've ever seen, and I mentioned the large moons you see in the desert.
Yes.
And I remember, sometimes on guard duty at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, when you have a really dark night, looking up at the sky in the desert. It's so peaceful and quiet, with no light pollution at all.
Of course, yeah.
Tactical, being in the army, but the skies were fantastic when you had a full clear night. It's an amazing sight, and to be in the desert now, on reflection, I think is an experience. And I would say to anybody, it is quite an experience to go out to the desert and to see those skies and have that experience. And some of my fondest memories are literally looking up at the sky at night and literally just enjoying the atmosphere. It was
absolutely, yeah.
The war itself, yes, apprehension, scary. Not particularly fond, but we did a job, and we had a job to do.
Yes.
And to be honest, it was the biggest deployment since World War II of British Armed Forces. We got the job done, and it was a UN-sanctioned war, which others haven't been since. So I'm quite proud that I took part in that and to liberate Kuwait. And it was a great undertaking. It's something that we would struggle, I think, unfortunately, with the armed forces that we have now to do. So it was a great experience. We lost people. I think UK overall lost something like 44 personnel on Operation Granby, and that's terribly sad. But it's one of those operations that I was glad I took part in, as I did in any of my operations. I did 2 Northern Ireland tours.
Of course, yes.
I did those,
and that's something, if you would be willing to chat about, it would be good to chat to you about that at some point in the future as well, if you'd be willing to.
Absolutely, no problem at all. When I left Operation Granby, I think the saddest thing I had was literally when we returned, we told our regiment was disbanding, which was quite sad. Yeah. And that was a catalyst which then sort of led to me leaving the army, really. I was intent on becoming a career soldier, as I said earlier, but due to the fact they were disbanding a lot of artillery regiments because of the Iron Curtain folding, the Cold War was over.
So just a general drawdown of the army, yeah.
So ended up literally, I left the army in 1993, few couple of years later.
Yeah.
It was a great experience, Simon. I'm glad I took part in it. I'm just sad that it cost the lives that it did.
Yes, of
from
course.
both sides, as in any war. But it is what it is at the time, and I think that's what people
Yes,
need to remember. It's like any conflict. You have these conflicts at the time for the reasons that politically, obviously, the politicians have failed, and this is what you do as a soldier.
exactly. Yeah.
You know,
Well, thank you very much indeed for all of that. It's been absolutely fascinating, and it's brilliant. You've gone into so much of the nitty-gritty detail of your kit and everything else,
no problem.
as well as the general, the experience and running through, how you deployed. It's been fascinating. So thank you very much indeed once again.
So
Um,
if there's anything else you need, Simon, give me a shout.
yes,
Yeah, please do.
very good of you. Thank you. Well, it would be fascinating in the future to talk about your service in Northern Ireland as well, and well, generally your service in the army in more general
Yeah,
terms, so up to.
I could
Uh,
talk about BAR if you want to bore you to death for that.
Well, but thank you very much again for this. That's fantastic. So a big thank you to David once again. Thank you very much indeed, David, for chatting to me and recounting your experiences. It was very interesting for me, and hopefully it was of interest to viewers as well. It certainly seemed appropriate for the 30th anniversary of the operations to have someone on to chat about their experiences out in the Gulf at the time. Certainly this is something I'm hoping to do more of in the future, is chat to veterans who served at various different time periods about their experiences and try and get them on record. I think it's a worthwhile thing to do, and hopefully, as I say, you found it interesting. If you have and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing going forward, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the little notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Patreon and PayPal are both linked down below, and a huge thank you as ever to all of my supporters over there. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in contact but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down there as well. But that's everything for this video, so until next time, bye for now.